Okay, Momoko, you're kind of abusing the OMGs, especially considering your age. Cobra for this one featured them establishing that it was going to be another once per season test of courage episode. And of course, Hazuki was scared out of her wit over them inevitably experiencing some sort of paranormal activity. Meanwhile, the scariest part for me is having to hear this performance again.
それは僕の父と夏美ちゃんのお父さんがまだ子供だった頃の話です。
The episode proper opened right at the Yamauchi temple with a slightly larger cast, with the Ojamajo now having invited classmates from 2 different classrooms. Unfortunately, they were mostly just these clowns who, yeah, I tried to block them out of my memory too, though we did get one new interesting addition who came with Yamauchi. This girl named Natsumi claimed that they had a bit of a Romeo and Juliet relationship, which Baldy here tried to deny.
違います。ただ似てるんです。
You mean aside from how even this guy acts better than you?
Oh, sing death to my love.
But yeah, as for why their families were conflicting with each other, it was mostly due to their fathers, with Natsumi's being a Christian priest who was neighbors with the Buddhist temple and Yeah, I'm out. Seriously, these faces perfectly summed up the awkwardness that came from bringing up 2 conflicting religious households. So, fortunately, it didn't actually involve their religions, which, yeah, even for this show with its heavy subject matters, I don't think anyone should have to be forced to debate that stuff. Anyway, their conflict actually stemmed from an old well that was in between their houses. One that, of course, they claim a ghost girl would climb out of.
吐いたので水を飲もうとしたら誤って井戸に落ちて亡くなってしまったというかわい。
Worst of all is that her roommate is a VHS otaku. Yeah, I get the feeling like someone on staff was legitimately a fan of Ringu, which did have its original film adaptation come out a few years prior to this, and the American adaptation was likely in production at the time. I don't think they were quite at the height of its popularity, hence why this is a full-on parody of it, but you can kind of feel the influence of the famous story about the ghost girl in the well who became quite the viral sensation. Anyway, the ghost lady in this story didn't have anywhere near as tragic a backstory as Sadako, and just basically had Doremi-esque bad luck that led her to accidentally falling down a well, which, yeah, okay, that's still kind of dark. But of course, it also brought up the question of why no one found a body, as at least with Sadako, the well was sealed up. We'd have to get answers to that later, as first, the kids had to elaborate on their father's encounter with the ghost lady. Oh my god, she's kind of pretty. Like, I get that this is a kid show and everything, but this episode, especially in comparison to last season's equivalent, just feels a lot less creepy and more laid back, especially when you consider the gruesome subject matter. Not to mention, they're pretty much just spoiling the twist of this episode, with the ghost lady turning out to be really chill in all of these flashbacks. I mean, come on, can't you at least give me something a little more shocking? Okay, that kind of works. Yeah, while the setup and the storyteller's voice acting were pretty weak, the well-animated reactions of the characters held it up, with us even seeing a different side to Momoko, who does seem like the type who would use some of the more colorful American language in this sort of setting. It added some pretty good comedy and energy to the episode. Anyway, they of course decided to make this the test of courage for the season by visiting the supposed cursed well. There, they encountered a being that was very clearly a ghost.
待てよ、あれは人だ。
Yeah, just ignore the fact that she's glowing more than Mr. Burns at night. The gang dispersed, except for the religious kids, who immediately discussed whether they should exercise or help her pass on.
Same difference.
The ghost lady then disappeared, giving Yamauchi and Natsumi time to gather up their respective exorcism tools. However, she then quickly reappeared to the Ojamajo who had tripped over themselves, and yeah, this is still not all that scary.
わかるわよ。あなたたち普通の人間じゃないでしょ。
Now, if you were to give her a sock puppet, well... And now I remember why I hate lamb chops so much. On the subject of Digimon VAs, it's kind of worth mentioning that Natsumi is voiced by Reiko Kikuchi, who, on top of playing a bunch of characters in the show, is probably best known for playing Daisuke from Zero 2. I bring this up for reasons we'll get to later in the episode. Anyway, the trio of Ojamajo learned the Ghost Lady's backstory, as well as who she prefers to identify as.
私は幽霊じゃなくてお化けよ。
それってどう違うんですか？
These words are often translated as ghosts, but primarily they refer to living things or supernatural beings who have taken on a temporary transformation, and these bakemono are distinct from spirits of the dead, and you know what, just stick with ghosts, alright? Okay, to be fair, she wasn't the spirit of a human who died a very unfortunate death like they were told, but rather just some random spirit who decided to live in a well, so I guess we can call her like the squatter spirit. She specifically wanted to live in this well because she thought the water tasted good, which, yeah, come on, lady. I know Dasani is disgusting, but I'm sure you can find better water out there that's not from this dirty old well. At the same time, the rest of the kids were suffering from varying degrees of horror, which, on top of resulting in some great reaction faces, also gave us some fun callbacks, like Masaru still using that charm he learned from Hazuki all the way back in season 1. That's probably the most attention that Toad has ever gotten in her very long life. Back with the Ojamajo, they decide to help both the squatter spirit and the Romeo and Juliet exorcist by learning why their fathers were feuding, which resulted in Natsume wanting to exorcise her. Thus, they transformed and did a trio variant of the magical stage, which to be fair was how the series started, and asked it to tell them how the fallout between the fathers happened. It showed them a flashback of when they were children, and looked and sounded almost exactly like their respective kids. I mean, okay, Natsume's dad did look a little more masculine, and his voice was closer to Daisuke's. Also, Mr. Yamauchi's name was Shenyang, so was their family immigrated from China or something? Well, anyway, they encountered the spirit, and Natsume's dad, Doji, ended up tripping into the well. Shenyang seemingly ran off in spite of his friend being in danger, but actually went to get some tools to ward off the spirit and rescue him. However, the spirit pulled him up as he somehow didn't break his neck and just fell into a bucket. And this resulted in Doji thinking that his friend abandoned him because he was a coward, rather than a bit of an idiot because, come on kid, you really don't need this elaborate of a get-up to rescue your friend. In any case, the Ojamajo wanted to help clear things up, and fortunately, they would get their chance, as first, all the kids would regroup at the well, as they're still planning on expelling the spirit.
No, それは誤解。あのお化けはただ静かに暮らしたいだけなんだよ。
Yeah, just ignore the fact that it's still her fault that Joji fell into the well in the first place, and she even seemed to actively scare Shenyang. That said, it's not as though they could have used those sorts of excuses on the fathers, who just so happened to show up at the same time. It resulted in the typical Romeo and Juliet setup with the arguing families, which considering that these two have been resenting each other for much of their lives, this wasn't going to be an easy fence to mend, so...
そんなのどうだっていいじゃん。逃げた逃げないなんてどうでもいいじゃん。
Well, I guess we only do have a few minutes left, so may as well just resolve this conflict here and now. I mean, okay, they did imply that the dads weren't totally on good terms just yet, and honestly, I wasn't all invested in this conflict in the first place, so I don't really mind if they kind of rushed this ending. With that, the episode ended with the kids' night, ending with some non-spooky activities. This was a pretty fun little ghost-themed episode. Yeah, let's just stick with ghosts. Not only were the characters' reaction to the spooky stuff hilarious, as always, but they also got a little creative with what the Ghost Lady could do. It's just a pity that was kind of dragged down by all of the Romeo and Juliet stuff, which, yeah, saying out loud, it doesn't exactly sound like it should fit in place, and it doesn't. Compared to the Test of Courage episode from the previous season, Sharp, this did feel like it lost a little of its edge. Well, sure, it still had a few fun, spooky moments that led to some good comedy, like Momoko's broken English scares, and the animation took a step up to give a little more energy to the reactions. However, I also think they made the Ghost Lady a little too chipper throughout. Like, I'm not against her turning out to be a fairly friendly ghost, but I think it would have been a fun twist if they kept her as a mysterious entity until the Ojamajo got to know her and learned that she wasn't all that malicious. I almost get the feeling like that previous episode was a little too scary for some, so they decided to lighten it up on the spooky stuff for this one. As a result, not only did the spirit feel overly silly at times, but they also threw in a Romeo and Juliet story in for no real reason. Like, not only did it feel superfluous, but the resolution was also kind of rushed. It's understandable if kids end up kissing and making up, but when it's two stubborn old dudes, it just doesn't feel as earned. Still, overall, I wouldn't say this was a bad Test of Courage episode, just nowhere near as good as the last one. It still had some fun moments and callbacks, but if you want an actually good parody of Ringu, might I recommend Gintama's take on it. Thanks for watching, and if you're not a coward, I dare you to watch some of our other videos, or is that too cruel? I mean, if you watch some of our other stuff that we produce almost every day, that'd be nice, just saying. Still, look forward to whatever comes next. Until then, though, farewell for now, my friends, and... Hey, if you're gonna come in through the TV, could you at least wipe your hands?